Good morning and welcome to ASL's HR in 10.
At 10.
I'm Jason Perry.
And I'm Kimberly Bradshaw.
And we get together each week to talk to you about what's going on in the world of HR and employment law.
As always, another hectic week with HR problems.
Do you know, there's so much we could talk about in the context of the travel industry. I don't know whether or not we ought to be talking about the difficulties they're having in recruiting, the difficulties they're having in onboarding their people, but I kind of think probably the bigger issue for most people is the consequences and how many people are stuck abroad right now and what an employer does about that.
Yes, it is really challenging. And just by way of an example, I was reading a friend's Facebook rant this morning. His flight was cancelled. It was a package holiday with an airline. His flight was cancelled. They provided no accommodation, nothing, and they had two small children with them, and basically he had to pay nearly £1,500 to get accommodation until he could get themselves a flight and get themselves home. Now he was lucky. It was he runs his own business, but for people that aren't in, don't have that luxury, in effect, they're absent without leave, aren't they?
Yes, they are. I mean, I remember something remarkably similar. About 12 years ago, I got stuck in Germany under the Icelandic ash cloud. And whereas I expected to fly home, I ended up having to hire a car and drive home because I needed to be back. But not everybody has the kind of resources to make that happen. And I think this is where the employer needs to come in right now, is how do you support your people? Because you're right, they're absent without leave, for want of a better way of putting it. And there's a really good argument as an employer. You can say, not my problem, I don't need to pay them, they didn't report for work. But I don't really think that's the right way forward right now.
No, you're right, and as always, it comes back to our favourite topic of employee engagement.
Employee
Jason.
engagement.
How could I not squeeze that in at least once on an
Absolutely.
HR 10? We have to put it, as you were saying earlier, Jason. We have to consider that yes, the cost of living is rising for individuals, but equally, it's having an impact on businesses. So, what can the employer afford? One thing that might be feasible would be letting them take extra holiday.
Yes.
If they've got any left.
I think the tough balance here is, this isn't that different to what we saw in COVID when people weren't able to work for, COVID reasons or whatever, and did you need to pay them? The reality is it's very, very easy to say you don't need to pay somebody, it's their problem. But we're also in the biggest recruitment and retention challenge we've seen for a generation. And if that's how you treat people, you're going to get a reputation of being an uncaring employer, and you're likely to find staff turnover problems going on when you can't replace easily. And that's why I think, Kimberly, you're absolutely right. You need to look at other things. And annual leave is one really good way. The easiest way forward is have a conversation with your staff, as you say, employee engagement, and say, how do we work with them to share the burden a little at minimum cost to the employer, but provide maximum support to the employee? And that might mean borrowing a little bit of leave from later in the year, and yes, they lose a bit, maybe borrowing some out of next year's quota if they're comfortable with that, maybe just advancing them a little above and beyond to try and look after them. But it's about getting the support right, isn't it? And being caring at this time.
And it goes back to being an employer of choice.
Yes.
We started seeing news about what's being called the Great Resignation, and retaining your key workers, your best resources, and the people that deliver what you do as a business is absolutely essential. And this is a great way to show the world how you're looking after your people and making them want to stay.
Yeah, totally. And that has to be such a big issue right now. The cost of either having one of your roles unfilled, coupled with the cost of actually trying to recruit somebody right now, is really, really tough. And if you can take simple baby steps to minimise that, it really is a no-brainer. Kimberly, you've kind of moved really nicely, I think, onto the other thing that caught my attention. And it's been going on a few weeks, but that wonderful trial of the 4-day week has started, hasn't it?
It has. I think, is it 70 companies across a whole range of sectors? I know there's academics, universities, public services, there's a fish and chip shop, and is it 3,500 workers? I can't remember exactly.
There's some big numbers involved, and it's a fascinating one to watch again, because the key, I was listening to an interview on the Today programme, I think yesterday morning, from one of the companies, and what they were trying to do was maintain the same level of productivity on a 4-day week. And I guess you're into some juggling around with the hours and moving people, but no less pay to the individual and maintaining productivity. And if that's achievable, and I mean, it's still an if at this point, but if that's achievable, what's the argument for not doing it? I'm struggling to see one.
I think it depends on your industry and the size of your business, doesn't it? I mean,
yes.
I was joking to you earlier that really I need an 8 or possibly a 9-day week to squeeze everything in. But, I think there's so many businesses could do this. Yeah. And I know they've had headings saying, people being paid 100% of their salary for 80% of their workload. But there is such a huge correlation, there's evidence going back decades between employee satisfaction and both job and life satisfaction and productivity and performance of a business, that I think, let's have a think about doing it. You just some people, you just need to juggle and plan slightly differently.
Running a recruitment business as I do, I might argue if you need an 8-day week, you need to ring your friendly recruiter and hire someone. But if I leave that to one side, I think the reality is what we've seen, and I'm cautiously going to put myself into the bracket of being a slightly older person now. During our lifetime, our working lifetime, we've seen the pressures on people change. As the pace of life has increased so much, people are more stressed. People are constantly doing more, and the challenges on them are more, whether or not in work or in home life. And I kind of think if there are things we can do to ease that causes people to calm and de-stress and get that emotional balance right, you're right, the productivity potentially can go up. And listening to this interview yesterday, I think it was the operations director who was basically saying we are creating an environment where our staff are now coming up with ideas of how we can do the same in less time. And if we can achieve that and therefore just match productivity, it's a win because the staff are happier, they have more personal time, or a day, even if they're doing slightly more hours on the 4 days they are doing. But they have a 3-day weekend, let's say. But actually, if you're achieving at least the same productivity, you've got a massive win, because immediately after that becomes the recruitment and retention gain. And we saw when, I think it was Atom Bank a few months ago, they've already done this. They're not trialling it. They've made the whole shift. And if I recall correctly, was it a 500% increase in candidate attraction they saw?
Something like that. It was
phenomenal difference at a time when everybody else is struggling to recruit.
I know. I think there are two things that strike me about this. One is the presenteeism debate, which is it's hard to not describe it in a neutral way, but there are managers who think that if you're not present, then you're not performing. The other one is for those of us that have roles where in our line of work, sometimes you have to be on call 24/7 because of potential issue. What does that mean for the debate about the right to time off? And if somebody's doing a 4-day week, Does that mean that they don't respond to emails in that? And obviously, you have to get the boundaries right for the individual and for the business, but potentially all these things
But
need
are
planning
we
out, don't they?
are we looking at anything different than we always have in the difference between hourly paid staff and salaried staff? Because we've always expected a salaried member of staff to do what's required, even if it means doing a little more outside of their normal expected hours, haven't we?
Yes, you're right. And, probably what that boils down to is the likes of me or you, I'm just using us as examples, to be thousands and millions of other people. I do take a cursory look at my emails, even when I'm on holiday. I just have a quick look, and if it's something urgent, I'll, issue it out for somebody to deal with. But otherwise, I just say, sorry, I'm on holiday, or I can't answer, and I'll get back to you on my next working day.
But the key point there is having the ability for your people to know how to make that decision of when they can switch off and when they can't, and actually say, do you know what, next week's my wedding anniversary, so I'm not going to look at my emails or be available that day at all. And there are certain times when it's right to switch off and you have to be able to say, but as long as you have that in place, I kind of think it's the same issue. But
yeah,
Kimberly, I'm looking at the time and thinking, as ever, I really thought we were going to sneak in one more topic today and talk a little bit about gender and equality training, but we might have to save that for another day, because HR in 10 has been running for pretty much 10.
And a bit.
We're just under the bit at the moment, actually, but we're pretty much there. We don't have time to squeeze in a whole other subject. So for now, I think we will draw a line. So thank you very much as ever.
Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you